Welcome to a sunny new podcast where I'll be speaking to people from the arts, business and beyond, and shining a light on their stories of success on the South Coast. This week's guest is Nick Fewings, a teamworkologist who has helped hundreds of teams around the world improve their effectiveness. In this episode, we talk about why teams need to make time for reflection, the importance of celebrating a team's behavioural diversity, and some great tips on how to deal with those difficult colleagues, plus the model Nick has developed to measure the effectiveness of your teams. It was great spending time with Nick as he's so passionate about his work and loves sharing advice to help others on their journeys. So if you're sitting comfortably, let's do this. Welcome, Nick. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you ever so much for inviting me.
As I mentioned to you before, part of the joy of doing this podcast for me so far has just been uncovering all the amazing people that we've got in our local area. And I'm completely fascinated by the human aspects of the work environment, everything from company culture, employee engagement and leadership. But when I first came across your profile and the work you did, what initially caught my attention was the fact that you'd called yourself a teamworkologist. So obviously we're going to primarily be talking about the book today, Team Lead Succeed, which I'm really excited about, which is all about helping teams achieve high performance teamwork. But I thought it probably makes sense, just based on that intro, if you could just explain to us where teamworkologist came from.
Yeah, sure. I'm a bit of a wordsmith, so that's the start of it, because ology comes from the Greek, so it's the study of. So I've been studying teamwork for 32 years. Since I became an accidental manager. And the other reason why I call myself a teamworkologist is I use LinkedIn to connect with people and to post articles about teamwork. And bizarrely, there's another Nick Fewings on LinkedIn. So I thought, how can I differentiate myself to make sure that people know who they're connecting with? So I added the word teamworkologist to my name.
That's brilliant. It certainly did its job, because it definitely grabbed my attention.
Oh, thank you.
It's quite distinctive personal branding, so it's working pretty well. You mentioned a couple of things there about your journey, and I always think it's interesting to find out a little bit about the people behind the work. So would you mind sharing what your journeys looked like up to that point, and perhaps expand a little bit on when you became that accidental manager?
Yeah, sure. I left school. I'm originally from Plymouth. I was born in Plymouth. Went to school there, and after my A-levels, I decided I need to go into employed work, and my grades weren't good enough to go to university, and I thought, what can I go into? What do I enjoy? And I used to enjoy playing Monopoly.
Okay.
So I thought, I'll go into banking so that I can play with real money. So I ended up getting employed by Barclays in Plymouth. And in those days, as you developed and grew and you learnt things, they would move you on to a different branch in the southwest of the region so that you could gain further experience. And I became a technical expert. So really, really good at particular aspects of a job. But it was just me, just by myself doing these technical things. It was in the days when computers were first starting to be used in the banks, and I figured out how to use them to make processes more effective and efficient.
Okay.
And I got headhunted from Plymouth. I went to the regional office in Exeter and worked for the regional director there. I then got headhunted to the finance department in Poole, and that's where I started to study project management. Okay. And I got my accreditation in project management. And then one of the managers said, "You've hit the glass ceiling as a technical expert. You can't go any further. So see that team over there? They've got a project to run, and you're going to lead that project team." So
and that's probably an interesting point, because the idea of the accidental manager, I think it's quite a common phenomenon. Like you said, people like yourself who have excelled, whether it's in a technical position, maybe it's sales, being moved to a management or a leadership position. And I know one of the stats that I came across when I was looking into some of the work you did was this one from the Chartered Management Study conducted in partnership with YouGov. And this was a nationwide study into the state of UK management and leadership. And they said that 82% of managers and leaders in UK PLCs don't have any training. And I believe that, reading your book, you found yourself as one of that 82%.
Exactly. And it's fascinating that you bring that statistic up, because I was invited, I think it was only about 6 weeks ago, to run a webinar for the Chartered Management Institute, where we talked about these accidental managers. And it frightens me that, yes, even today, 82% of those people in leadership positions have had no leadership training before they take on that role. And that's what really sparked my passion for teamwork, because I suddenly thought, I need to do something about this, because when I became an accidental project manager, I destroyed my team because of my ineptitude, which I apologise to them for.
At least you were aware enough.
I was aware,
actually, because there's plenty of managers that don't have that awareness.
That's right, and just carry on.
Carry
on. But I blew the budget. The project overran. There were many errors in it, and actually, I was in a pretty bad place. In terms of my own personal well-being, because I thought I was going to do slightly better than I actually did. So that actually gave me a opportunity to reflect as to what were the skills that I was missing, and what were the tools and techniques that would have enabled me to achieve success. And that sparked the passion for me for teamwork. And over the years, I've developed that passion, and now I feel it's a great joy to be able to actually share that passion with other people to help them on their journey.
No, definitely. And I mean, we're definitely going to spend the majority of our time benefiting from your wisdom in that area today. But as you know from the title of the podcast, Success on the South Coast, that's one of the themes. And I always think it's interesting to understand for individuals how that concept of success evolves over time. What you think of success today is probably different to what it was back then. So if we could rewind the clock back to when you were, I think you'd achieved that leadership role before your 30th birthday, which was a target I know from reading your book.
Yes, yeah.
If you think of yourself back then at 29 years old, say, what would success have meant to you, do you think? I
think success then was getting into that leadership position before I got to the age of 30. I thought, that would demonstrate success, that I'd been good as an individual, a technical expert, but then also I'd been a great leader as well in terms of success. but it didn't work out that way. And I would see success these days is totally different.
Well, we don't. No spoilers. We'll come back to that. But so let's talk about teamwork then, because one of the things I love about you is you've clearly ended up working in an area that you're just super passionate about, which is just brilliant to see. It's really timely to have this conversation because I think you were again, you brought this to my attention, but LinkedIn recently published their top 10 in-demand skills for 2024, of which teamwork was featured on that list.
Yeah.
And the LinkedIn CEO said, we are in the early days of a world of work that is more human than before. So I wonder, have you seen how teamwork's evolved over that 30 plus years that you've been working in the field?
I don't think it's evolved as much as it should have done.
Okay,
I think organisations need to revisit their strategies when it comes to developing their leaders before they get into the role, but also providing those leaders and their teams them with learning and tools to understand teamwork.
Why do you think, because I've heard this even a couple of times in conversations I've had, and even talking with friends about why do you think it is that we're still so poor at giving leaders the right learning and development opportunities? Like when you talk to the CMI, for example, did you talk about the why? Like, why is this happening?
Yeah, I mean, and I wrote an article afterwards that the CMI then actually put out to their membership in terms of why. And as I've just mentioned, I think it goes back to the strategy of organisations that they need to do a lot more in terms of the development of those aspirational leaders, those leaders that are coming through the pipeline. They need to actually invest in those people, because ultimately when they get into that role and they fail, the finger is pointed at that leader, and invariably it's not their fault. It's the fact that they haven't been given the support to lead effectively.
And I can imagine that can be a very expensive mistake as well often. And also expensive in terms of the well-being of that person, that individual, but also the team that they're leading, because people can do a lot of damage to other people, especially in leadership positions. No, absolutely.
So,
and I think that this is probably a good transition into the subject of teamwork, because one thing I found interesting when I read in your book was I'd never kind of thought of it like this, but you talked about how teams are actually the constant and those leaders are almost dropped in, and that's more temporary. So the whole concept of how that team operates is almost a separate entity in itself, regardless of the leader in a way.
I mean, the leaders add a different slant on things based on their leadership style, because we all have different leadership styles, and that's one of the reasons why I call the book Team Lead Succeed, because there are more team members than leaders, and that's why the book focuses more on teamwork than it does on leadership. I mean, there's some great leadership learning in there. However, I wrote it because I believe that everybody in a team has got a voice, not just the leader. If things aren't working well in a team, anybody in that team should be able to put their hand up and I shout it out and say, this doesn't feel right. This isn't working properly. What can we do to overcome these challenges that we face?
And I guess having a culture where a team member can stand up and say something like that's probably a good sign that you've got an effective team. Well, it's out of the 16 areas of teamwork that I cover in the book, trust is what I believe is the second foundation of good teamwork. Okay. Don't give away what the first one is, because we're going to come to that. So, all right, before we dive into the book itself then, challenges, reasons why teams aren't operating effectively. I mean, I was really shocked by the statistic that said that only 10% of teams are high performing. And out of the remaining 90%, you've got 50% that are kind of average, and then you've got 40% that are outright dysfunctional.
Yes, yeah.
Which is pretty scary. But is that reflected in your experience of talking at all these conferences, going into companies?
Yeah, I mean, you speak to individuals, and they'll tell you quite often their team is dysfunctional, or they've worked in dysfunctional teams. And, those statistics that you've mentioned about 40% of teams being dysfunctional, I've just read recently Harvard Business Review has just done another poll and survey, and those figures still hold true.
Wow.
So, and again, those figures, that's quite frightening.
They are scary numbers. When I read that, I wouldn't have been surprised to have seen high performing only being a small proportion, but the amount of dysfunctional definitely surprised me.
And equally, so basically with the 50% average, you've got teams that are mediocre, happy with mediocrity. Which again isn't doing teams or organisations any favours at all.
Not at all, no. Yeah. So in the book, you start off outlining a few of the challenges. And one of the things I like about the book is you say that it's not a manual. You're not going to read that and suddenly make every team super high performing. No. But it does have a lot of really practical advice in it, which is what I love about it. I always find with these kind of books that sometimes they can be full of kind of theory. The thing I love about this is it's pretty much all focused on the practical, like what you can do about it. But I don't know.
That's thanks to those people that when I had the idea for the book, because I'd been asked to write a book for 20 odd years, but I've always been too busy. And when I had the idea, I went out to probably about 30 people that I knew from different organisations, so from public sector, private, and the third sector. Also at different levels of the organisation, because as I said, I wanted a book that everybody could read and get value from. And I just said to them, this is the idea. How would you want me to write it? What would you want me to include that would actually add value to you and the job that you do? And they came back and said, keep it light on the theory, give us practical ideas, include stories, include some humour as well. So I've got those 30 people who reviewed that idea and came up with those thoughts. I've got them to thank, because then I just went away and wrote it how they wanted it to be written.
Yeah, well, I should thank them as well, because whatever they told you, I think you absolutely nailed it. And again, I think the humour really does come across, which is great. So talking about the dysfunctional teams then, because I think it's useful to consider that before we go into the practical tips and the how we're going to fix it. What are the most common issues you see when you're on your travels in terms of complaints around what makes these teams dysfunctional?
Well, the first word, and you'll have probably heard it many, many times, communication.
Okay,
where people feel that they aren't being communicated enough, or else they're being communicated with too much, or it's in a particular style. So our communication needs, we need to understand our behavioural preferences. So communication certainly is one that comes up time and time again. Team meetings, so ineffective team meetings.
That's on my list. I want to come back to that to talk about more.
And another one is reflection, that teams do not spend enough time reflecting on what they've done in the past and saying, okay, what's gone right that we need to continue to do, but equally, what are the things that haven't gone as well as they could, and how can we change those and implement and transform as a team? So quite often, communication, team meetings, and reflection are the three that come up quite often.
Okay.
And another one is lack of purpose.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's perfect then, mentioning that, because that's obviously, well, we'll come to it, but that's number one in the list, and I wanted to ask you why that was. It's interesting that you talked about that lack of reflection, because I also read a statistic saying that only 20% of teams ever go back and do that reflection exercise. And as you said, learning from mistakes is equally valuable to everything that went well.
Yes, yeah. I mean, and I was talking to somebody today, and I gave them the analogy of sports teams. You know, sports teams, if we take, for instance, football, because the season's recently started.
And we're both football
fans. And forget the cup games, etc. The league, most teams are playing on a Saturday. You know, we've got the midweek games, but it's mostly on Saturday. So for the rest of the 6 days of the week, they are looking at tactics. They are understanding what went wrong last time and how they can put that right the next time. So they do a lot of coaching, they do a lot of teamwork, they do a lot of reflection, with the aim of actually making the next game as good or better than the last game.
It's become a whole industry in itself, hasn't it? The whole video analysis and all the statistics they're tracking.
We walk through the doors of our organisations, our businesses, and that seems to go out the window.
Yeah.
You know, teams are just focused on achieving the goals, getting the sales through the door. And when things go wrong, they just try a little bit harder, and quite often it doesn't work. They need to stop and say, okay, let's take a step back. You know, and sometimes all you need is a day of let's analyse what's working well, what's not working well, and let's put things right.
Yeah, no, definitely. Sadly, it just seems like often there just isn't the time spent on these kind of things. Well, as you mentioned, you'd been asked for many years to put this book together, and I guess we can reflect now and say it was one of the good things to come out of the COVID lockdown, that suddenly, finally, you had that time to put pen to paper. When I started reading it, one of the things I loved about it, and again, I guess it's the humour, was that you talked about it being structured like a recipe book, where you've got some core ingredients that everyone needs to be aware of, all teams should focus on, and then you've got some nice additional ingredients that you can sprinkle on that are almost like additional enhancements to the team. So I just wondered, first and foremost, if you wouldn't mind explaining for the audience how the book is split into the two sections. So number one, the who, and then number two, the how. Sure.
Well, the first part, the who's in your team, was the first thing that I studied after I failed as the accidental manager. And therefore I was keen to understand people and behaviours and preferences. So in terms of achieving high performance teamwork, you need to understand two things: who's in your team and how effective and efficient your teamwork is. So in terms of the who, there's two elements to that. There's understanding people skills and understanding technical skills. And some teams do one, some teams do the other, and some teams don't do anything at all. In terms of the weight, in terms of success, most of the studies say that our success is predominantly down to our people skills. Most of the studies put it at 85% people skills, 15% technical skills. And
that's when quite compelling numbers, isn't it?
I know, and when I first looked at those statistics, I thought, oh, that's quite high. But if you think about it, yes, we've got technical skills, so those are the things that we've either learnt degree at university. We might have a project management accreditation, accountancy. So those are what your technical skills. Also, PowerPoint, Canva, whatever it is, Word. Those are also technical skills. And then you've got the people skills, which is how we behave towards each other, our communication needs and our communication style, how we make decisions. And it's really important to understand all those differences in your team, because the teams that do really, really well are those teams that are what they call heterogeneous teams. So they have a diversity of people and a diversity of people skills and technical skills in the team. They tend to be the ones that do extremely well, providing they value and appreciate that diversity. So the homogeneous teams, so teams where people are very, very similar, a bit like Dolly the sheep and cloning each other, those teams tend to be the ones that struggle.
Okay.
So understanding people, really, really important.
And just to pick up on that, because I know you are a scholar and you are somebody who studied this. You talked about your experience with behavioural psychology, and I think you're a follower or a fan of Carl Jung from what we've talked about previously. Can I just ask, how did that kind of study influence your approach to the Who?
Massively. It was just like a light bulb moment. Suddenly things fell into place. I understood more about myself, what my strengths were, what my challenges were, and also to value and appreciate people that were different to me. And when I work with teams these days, I always say one of the key things when you're looking at those colleagues in your team is to have two paradigm shifts. So one is, don't see people as difficult. Just actually say to yourself, they're different to me. They've got different behavioural preferences. And also, don't be frustrated by how people do things. Be fascinated that people do things differently to you and maybe get a better result. So I always say to teams, that's what you should be thinking about, is those two paradigm shifts. Yeah,
that's really, really good advice. I can already think of how I could adopt that, actually. Yeah. No, that's so I guess this is a perfect time. So we've talked about the Who, which is the first part, and that takes up the first section of the book. Yeah. The remainder, as you've alluded to, talks about the how and is split into the 16 different elements. Yeah. So my understanding is that is largely based on the model that you developed previous to the book. So could you explain to people a little bit about your team dynamics model?
Yeah, sure. So key thing, first of all, studied Carl Jung, understood behaviours, really important. Then I created a team around me with those diversity of skills, both people skills and technical skills. And then I always say I'm quite inquisitive. I've always been quite inquisitive, asking questions. My wife would maybe say something different. But I used to ask my team, how good was our last team meeting? Was it effective? Did we get the actions that we needed? What's communication like? Do we value each other? What levels of trust have we got in our team? Does everybody hold each other accountable? So I used to ask all these questions, and then I went on a course where we had to think about what's the difference between a group of people and a team. And I started writing down notes, one of which was a team has a purpose, a common goal, common responsibilities. A team is committed to that purpose. there's accountability, there's communication, there's processes. So I started writing down these words, and then I started thinking about the questions that I used to ask my team. And suddenly these questions started falling into these categories that I'd written down.
Okay.
So that was how the model started to be created. And I came up with 16 different areas of teamwork, 4 that relate to strategy, 4 that relate to engagement, 4 that relate to cooperation, and 4 that relate to what I call structure, so the framework that the team works towards. And that was how the team dynamics model was created, was born. I called it Team Dynamics with a capital DNA.
Yeah,
because
I love that.
It's the DNA of the team.
Yeah.
And of course different teams have different DNA because they work in different sectors, different services, different products, different sizes of the team. Some are hybrid teams, some work in the same department, some are spread globally. So that DNA changes with each team, but those 16 areas of teamwork, they remain the same.
Yeah.
It's just that there's different strengths in different areas. So that's how I came up with the model. And
just to emphasise for people, this model is designed and built to measure the overall effectiveness of a team.
Yeah. So there's a report that sits behind the model. It's a unique model and report. I'm not aware of anything like it in the world. And the model and the report have been used worldwide, so I know that it works across different cultures, which is great. And yes, the report is in depth, and it actually measures overall team effectiveness, and then it measures the effectiveness of those 16 different elements, as I call them, elements of teamwork. And then underneath that, there's some granular data which you can drill down to understand exactly where challenges lie, but equally you can celebrate success.
Yeah.
Because it's really good that if something's working well, we say, let's make sure that we keep working and doing it in that way.
Well, that's the name of the game here. It's all about success.
It's all about success indeed.
So if we start then maybe diving into a few of those elements, unfortunately we haven't got the time to do all of them as much as I'd love to, but you mentioned it earlier, and I was curious when I read it. Knowing you even for a short time, I knew that you'd put purpose as number 1 for a reason.
Yeah.
So perhaps you could just expand on why, from your perspective, that was first on the list.
A lot of commentators and authors will say that trust is the most important thing to get right in a team. I disagree. I think it's purpose, because I think if you get purpose right, then trust starts to develop, and trust develops over a period of time. And the analogy that I make is, if you go for a job role, you've seen a job advert and you think, oh, I like the look of that. You look at it and you go for it in terms of trying to get an interview based on the purpose of that job role, the responsibilities, the goals, etc. You don't actually apply for that role by thinking, oh, I wonder if I trust all those people in the team. That is a secondary thing. That starts to happen organically once you actually join the team.
Yeah, that is very
so I think
true.
Certainly purpose for me drives everything that the team does. And frighteningly, 4 out of 10 team members say that they don't really understand what their team purpose is.
So just to pick up on that then, in a well-performing, highly effective team, what does purpose look like?
Yeah, I mean, when I work with teams, team purpose for me is I get them to create a team purpose statement, which is very simple but very, very effective. And your team purpose should have 3 elements to it. What does our team exist to do? So why are we here? What does that enable? So it should enable other things to happen. And really importantly, what are the benefits at the end? Okay. So whereas Simon Sinek in his book says start with why, I would say start with what.
Okay.
Yeah. What do we do? What does that enable? And what are the benefits?
Excellent. No, I really like that. And so in terms of other ones that we've already mentioned, you talked about team meetings, and I think probably quite a few people can think of being sat in a meeting and just maybe daydreaming, kind of wondering why they're there, etc. So again, what does that look like? What does good look like from a team meeting point of view?
Yeah, sure. I mean, first of all, get the agenda out in good time. And that links back to people skills and our communication styles, because there are some people who like to do the thinking outside of meetings. Tends to predominantly be more introverted people. Extroverted people can literally pick up the agenda and be prepared, because they communicate and share ideas for other people to shape. So rule number 1 is get the agenda out early, so that those people in your team that like to do their thinking and come prepared have that time to do so. The other thing is make sure it starts and ends on time.
Yeah.
That comes up time and time again as an issue in teams where team meetings overrun.
Yeah.
And sometimes that has a knock-on effect. People have so many meetings these days, and they put those meetings in their diary back to back.
Yeah.
So once your first meeting overruns, it has that domino effect of all your other meetings overrunning again.
I can certainly relate to that. And I think particularly since we've moved to remote working, where, like you say, it's so easy to book up every single slot in your calendar.
Yeah.
I definitely find myself on days where I'm literally turning up late 5 minutes for every meeting on that day, because like you say, they kind of compound as you go through the day.
Yeah.
So I'm sure there's a lot of people sat that can definitely relate to that.
Yeah, ultimately it's the problem's been created by Microsoft Outlook and the calendar in there.
Yeah.
Because the calendars are all half-hour slots. You know, so I say to teams who sometimes come up with these problems, and I've had team members say exactly the same. Why don't we just have our team meeting for 45 minutes? And that gives us a 15-minute buffer to be able to gather our thoughts and go to the next meeting. It's not rocket science. Unless
someone then books that 15-minute slot, which I've seen happen.
Well, yeah.
But I definitely agree with that principle. I've seen something similar with someone booking even 55 minutes just to give people. And I think being respectful of people's time is definitely worthwhile.
I mean, the other thing as well with meetings, again, that I hear quite regularly is teams not following up on the actions that they've talked about in the previous meeting. So those actions tend to just fade away into the background. So really important. You don't have to minute everything that's been said in a meeting. But if there's actions, the actions should be there. It should be assigned. It should be a responsibility of somebody to actually take that action, and then they should agree over what time scale that is going to be actioned, and then they should be held accountable.
It's like you said, it's not all rocket science, is it? A lot of this stuff is really kind of basic.
It's common sense.
When you hear it, but it's great just to have it kind of outlined, especially against the 16 elements that you're talking about. It
always makes me chuckle. Sometimes it's as though we go through the doors of the office and just extract our brain and sort of put it down and walk in, and we forget common sense and doing simple things but doing them effectively and efficiently.
That's a great piece of learning just there.
Yeah.
Next one I wanted to look at, another word that you hear thrown around a lot, number 13, vision. Should inspire and motivate the team.
Yeah.
And I just wondered, you give a few really great examples of vision statements in the book. I've got one here from Google where they simply say, to provide access to the world's information in one click. And I just wondered, from your point of view, you talked about purpose as number one. How do you see that vision differ from purpose?
Yeah, purpose I see is the here and now, and the next 12 months. This is what we've got to do. These are the goals that we've got to achieve. These are the ticks in the box to make sure that we've achieved what we've set out to. So purpose I always feel is here and now, and it tends to be operational, whereas the vision is future orientated and aspirational. So this is what we're doing now, purpose. This is what we want to achieve. This is what we want to become in the future.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of teams again that don't really understand the difference between the two. And our American colleagues, they actually throw another spanner into the works by calling it mission. Yeah. And again, that gets bantered around, but sometimes people are not using that in its correct sense. So I always say to people, purpose, get your purpose right. What are we trying to achieve here and now and over the next 12 months, maybe 18 months? Vision is aspirational, motivational, inspirational. This is what we're trying to become as a team, as an organisation.
And do you think that vision part, maybe it gets forgotten about because everyone's so busy with the here and now? They're kind of almost obsessed with the purpose, like what needs to be done now. They don't necessarily have an opportunity or time to reflect and think about what they might like it to look like in the future.
Yeah, most definitely. Most definitely.
And one of the bits of advice I read in the book was how you would encourage the team members themselves to be involved in creating that vision statement. And I just wondered whether you could talk a little bit about that and whether you've seen examples in organisations.
Yeah, I mean, I love involving every member of the team as much as possible. I mean, there are situations as a team leader where you've got to make decisions yourself. However, in the majority of situations when it comes to teamwork, we can all get involved, because as a leader, you're just actually undertaking a different role within the team.
Yeah.
And sometimes team members are the ones that come up with the best ideas based either on their experience, what they've done in the past, or just their creative side, that all of a sudden out of the blue they say something and you think, wow, that is fantastic. I wouldn't have thought about that in a million years. So whenever I've worked with teams, but I've also done it with departments where I've got everybody involved in creating value sets and behaviours, I do equally the same within the team to say, okay, we haven't got a vision, so let's sit down. Let's actually first of all understand what we're talking about when we talk about vision, so that we're all on the same wavelength and the same hymn sheet, as they say. And once we've understood what we're talking about with vision, let's break out into smaller groups and just get a flip chart or a piece of paper and come up with some ideas. And then we can share those ideas, and we can take a little bit of that and a little bit of this. Or it could be that one group has come up with the answer, which is great. We put that in place.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that, and the great thing about that is if you get the team involved, they own it, and then they buy into it, and then they're committed to it.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of a through line to all of these elements, isn't it? Getting buy-in and making sure that everyone's involved. You're always going to be more successful and more effective if you do that.
Yeah.
The final element that I wanted to talk about today, which is kind of related in a way to vision, the way at least I interpret it, is transformation, the final one of those 16. And it sounds quite sexy, transformation, because this is almost like, right, you've got everything else working properly. Now the final step in your team journey is to really transform. And could you give us your thoughts on what that element looks like?
Yes, I always say to teams, no matter how good you are, there's some teams that have used the team dynamics report that have gone from 64% effective and they've got up to 85% effectiveness. So they've gone from dysfunctional, to use the terms we've used earlier on, to high performing. It's taken them a couple of years, and it's a step change process. You implement something, you see whether it works. If it does, you continue to do it. If it doesn't, you tweak it and do something slightly different. So I always say to teams, even those teams that I've worked with that are high performing, there's always an opportunity to squeeze a little bit more juice from the orange. We can just squeeze that orange a little bit further. So I think teams have still got to say, what can we do better? Yeah. What can we do more of? What can we tweak? There's always something that we can change to make more effective and more efficient.
So is it about the team collectively being in that mindset where they're looking for continual improvement and identifying rooms to eke out those extra 1% that people talk about now?
Exactly. Yeah, and and it can come from anywhere. If you've got new technology that's been put in, there's always an opportunity to use that technology even better than what you're using it at the moment. There's a lot of teams, they have processes and procedures that they follow. It's good to actually take time out and reflect, are those processes still effective? Are they still efficient? Are there any things that we need to change? So I think transformation, if you don't transform as a team, you stagnate.
Yeah.
And to use one of my I love quotations. I love creating quotations. And in terms of transformation, I wrote one recently that said, the decision makers and action takers of today are the change creators of tomorrow. Yeah. So, and that's all about transformation.
Yeah, I remember that from the book, actually, so it definitely registered with me. I mean, this whole idea completely resonates with me, because I think, part of my kind of makeup is I'm always hungry to learn more and evolve and develop. So I totally understand why you've got that in as a kind of collective team goal, that's almost like the end point that you're all kind of aiming for.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't transform as a team, ultimately you will stagnate, you will wither, and then you will be challenged, and eventually the team will destroy itself.
And going back to our football analogy, that's why they always say with teams that win titles, that's when you invest, you go again, you bring in new players to keep things fresh, because if you're not moving forward, like you said, you're going backwards and you're going to be overtaken.
Exactly.
So I obviously picked out 4 that just kind of caught my interest, and I could have pretty much picked any of the 16. Is there any one that maybe I've missed that you have a particular affection for or think is important?
Not in terms of affection. I think the one that, again, sometimes organisations and teams don't think about is diversity. And in organisations, we see it left, right and centre. There's a lot of strategies to do with diversity in terms of sexual diversity, religious diversity, people with physical disability. So and those policies are absolutely needed, must have. However, the one that causes organisations the most pain, that tends to go under the radar, is behavioural diversity, i.e. I hate you because you are different to me. And the CIPD latest figures say that of 70% of those people that leave an organisation and go to another job, they do so because they've had a bad relationship either with their boss or a colleague. So I think personally, I believe that behavioural diversity and an understanding of differences in people and people skills needs to come to the forefront of the agenda, because that's the one that causes the most pain in organisations. You know, you just think about the cost when people move from your organisation somewhere else because of a bad relationship, and then you're faced with recruiting somebody else and all the investment costs that entails.
No, that's a really interesting twist on the whole kind of concept of diversity. Not one I thought about, actually. So some real food for thought there. What would be your approach then to addressing that? Because obviously you've identified it as a big problem, different personalities almost ultimately leading people to leave jobs. So again, I guess, what's the practical advice on trying to remedy this situation?
I mean, the practical advice, and again, based on statistics and polls that I've done recently, only 50% of organisations do this, is I'd recommend behavioural profiling. Some people call them personality tests. They're not a test. There's no pass mark or failure. So I like to call them, people skills profiles, and they're great learning documents, and there's loads of them out there. I won't mention any by name, but all I would say to people is do not go for a behavioural profile that is cheap and cheerful, which you can find on the internet, and you pay peanuts for, because then you will just get something that is not accurate, it's not valuable as a development tool. And the key thing I would say to people is, whatever profiling tool that you decide upon using, make sure that it's accredited by the British Psychological Society. And you'll see them, you'll see these profiles. If you search profile, they should say somewhere accredited or recognised by the British Psychological Society. So that means that they've been tested to make sure that they are accurate, that they are valid, and therefore they are useful.
Oh, excellent. Well, I'll definitely do a bit of investigation into that, and maybe I can twist your arm or fair and you can recommend me one to look at. But just to round off on the book, I mean, I've absolutely loved reading it. As I mentioned, it's so full of practical advice, but also I think one of the things that really appeals to me is it's just got so much personality. Clearly, having met you, so much of your personality. You've mentioned your love of wordplay and things like that, and I love the fact that every element's introduced with a poem. And you go into the etymology of a lot of the terms, which all makes it a really accessible and enjoyable read.
Thank you.
And with all that said, you're even left with a place to capture your ping moment.
Yeah.
So it's just a brilliant book. So moving on from the book then, this came out in 2022.
Yeah.
I know that earlier this year, so now into 2024, you created Our Team Synergy.
Yeah.
So would it be possible just to share a little bit about how that developed?
Yeah, sure. obviously I created the team dynamics model in the report, and then when COVID came along, I wrote Team Lead Succeed. And again, thinking about transformation and doing things better and more effectively and more efficiently, I thought, hang on, at the moment I have to go and work with a lot of teams. They call me in to help facilitate their team development sessions. And I thought, there's enough learning material in that book, and also combined with the Team Dynamics report, I suddenly thought, why can't we make it accessible to every organisation, every team, so that leaders and team members can have the learning that sometimes they haven't got, going back to the start of our conversation today. So we create some sort of learning area, academy. So we've done that. We've created an online learning academy where people can learn about all these different aspects of teamwork, so they become proficient at understanding what are the really important things to get right if you want to make a high performing team. And then to make sure that it's not in the hands of people that haven't done the learning, we've created a confirmation of learning that people have to achieve. And once they've achieved that, it opens up their ability to produce their own team reports and then facilitate the results of those with their team. So really beneficial, because team members and team leaders have first and foremost got the learning, and then they've got the tools to measure their teamwork. So our Team Synergy is a product that combines both, and we launched it after lots of testing, lots of positive feedback. We launched it a few months ago. We've done a couple of webinars. The feedback and response has been really, really positive from organisations, small, medium, and we're talking some big, large corporates that are really interested, because there's nothing out there like it, and they're seeing that it's another part of the jigsaw that they can put in place, rather than just relying on key performance indicators. At the end of the day, whatever key performance indicators an organisation uses, they only succeed with those key performance indicators based on the effectiveness of teamwork. So if you think the main key performance indicators usually rate to cost, quality and time. And if you think about those three key performance indicators, teamwork sits underneath them. You know, if you're going to make a quality product, you need really good, effective teamwork. If you're going to take less time to do something, then your teamwork needs to be efficient so that you do it resourcefully. So those main key performance indicators are all underpinned by teamwork, and suddenly organisations are realising, we've got to focus on this.
So the way it works then, do you get access to these materials? So does it ultimately mean that you wouldn't then need someone like yourself to come in? You could actually facilitate the whole thing within your own organisation?
Basically, I'm making myself redundant.
But also available to the world's companies at the same time?
Exactly. I mean, one of my passions throughout life is to help other people as best I can. And obviously, having a passion for teamwork, there's only so many places that I can go. And obviously, getting to my stage of life, I want to leave a legacy. And I want to help organisations and teams and leaders succeed. So this was just a great way to do it.
No, well, it sounds super positive and an amazing legacy to leave, like you say. it's probably a good moment to say I can't have you on this evening without at least mentioning the Harvard Business Review, because I know only last week you got this email from them and that you've been invited to be an advisory council member for the Harvard Business Review. So I just was curious to find out a little bit about what that involves.
It totally came out of the blue, and speaking to some other people, they look for people predominantly on LinkedIn who have a focus or a niche on a particular area of business life, and they've obviously picked up mine to do with teamwork. So they invited me to be on their advisory council. So when there's reports or statistics or polls or anything that they've gathered some information about, if it's to do with teamwork, then they'll come to seek my counsel, which is...
That's pretty amazing, isn't it? So it sounds like the Teamworkologist did its job for them as well as me then.
Indeed, yeah. I did think it was a scam to start off with. I thought it's one of these scam emails.
I can imagine, because it's not every day you expect to see that drop into your inbox, is it?
So I did check it out quite thoroughly. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, let's move on, because one of the main themes of this podcast that I like to talk about is happiness, and I'm sure you were happy once you found out that wasn't a scam and it was a genuine email. But what do you think is the true meaning of happiness? Interesting.
I think different people have a different perception and a different view of happiness. For me, certainly in terms of my values, it's helping others, seeing other people succeed. That makes me happy. The emails that I get back that say, your book or your facilitation or your conference speaking has actually changed my life positively. That makes me happy. Spending time with family and friends. Walks out on the coast, in the forest, those things make me happy. Again, it's personal well-being. So happiness has many shapes and forms. So in terms of happiness in business, it's certainly seeing people develop and grow, and knowing that I've helped them on their journey. And as I said, happiness in my personal life is making memories with my wife on our travels, either abroad or in the UK, spending time with family and friends, sharing a joke, sharing a drink and a bite to eat. I think those are the things that really make me happy.
It's no wonder we get on then.
Yeah.
I one thing that was apparent to me even before I met you, just in the kind of LinkedIn and just the way you wrote about the subject you're involved in, was that it was clear that this is a guy who is just really passionate and enthusiastic about his work that he does, which you've echoed now. And I noticed it on one of your posts that you talked about Ikigai.
Oh yes,
which is, I must admit, maybe I'm behind the curve on this one. I only came across that probably in the last 12 months.
Yeah.
But you strike me exactly someone who has achieved or is, achieved and attained their Ikigai. And for people that maybe like me didn't know what that means, it's defined as having a motivating force, something that gives a person a sense of purpose or a reason for living. And I like that image where it's shown as that intersect between what you love, what you're good at, what the world needs, and what you can be paid for. And it seems to me like you're squarely in the centre of that.
Yeah, I mean, I do. I love Eastern philosophies, and Ikigai is a great philosophy, and you're right. I have looked at, I've studied it, and try and get myself in that bullseye, right in the middle.
Yeah.
But another sort of philosophy that I like is Buddhism as well, and I read some of the stuff by the Dalai Lama, and I just think that some of the Far Eastern philosophies are really good for your own personal well-being.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think, again, there's a kind of thread of some of that in the book, which works really well. Okay, well, as we talked about right at the start of our conversation, one of the themes clearly from the name of the podcast is all about success. So now that we're nearing the end and we've talked about your journey right from the early days and right up to what you're doing now, how has your view of success changed, and what does it mean to you as you sit here today? Yeah,
I mean, success for me is... I said to somebody the other day, they asked me a similar question, what is success like? And I said, success for me is not having loads of money in the bank, it's not having the big house, the big car, etc., which I haven't got any of that. But it's success for me is helping other people, as I said, on the journey through life. And I said to this other person, I said, I want to be a millionaire in positive memories. So for me, success is making memories, and making those memories with family and friends and other people that you meet on your journey through life. So, I think success is providing a legacy, as hopefully I've done with the book and the team dynamics model and the R team synergy product. I think that's a successful legacy for me. And then it's the making memories on the other side. And obviously that then links into what makes you happy as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's like a self-fulfilling circle.
Certainly interlinked, aren't
they? Yeah.
And just exactly the type of poetic answer to that question I would have expected from you. In terms of skills, you've talked about what success means to you, and what are the skills that you think you've learnt that have enabled you to be successful in your chosen field?
Yeah, I think the main skill, and I think I mentioned it in the book, is something that my mother said when I didn't get very good grades at school. And she said to me, as long as you get on with people, you'll be okay in life. So I think that's, for me, is one of the most important skills. It's the ability to be able to get on with people. Yeah. And to value and appreciate, going back to what I said earlier on, no, they're not difficult, they're just different. Yeah. So, because we got to be honest, some people do irritate us. But if we can actually say, I understand that they're not doing it on purpose, it's just that they have a different behavioural style. And I think then it actually suspends judgment. Yeah, no, completely. So,
very wise words from your mum, and I saw that you'd included her in the acknowledgements and repeated that, which was a really nice touch.
Yeah, because she wanted a copy of the book, so I thought I better include her.
I wanted to finish with a regular feature of the podcast that I call Life by Misadventure, because I'm always interested to hear those kind of stories that are a bit off the beaten track, things people have learnt maybe outside of the office. So I wonder, from your point of view, what is a lesson that you've learned from an unexpected source?
Yeah, interesting. How many days have you got?
We can keep it on rolling.
One that really springs to mind for me is I was working with an organisation, a big pharmaceutical company that were based just outside Philadelphia. And I worked with one team. They found value in what I did. So then I got another email from another team, could you come back out to Philadelphia, etc. So I was going out to Philadelphia on quite a regular basis. Additionally, I'd also been asked to do some work with a team in the middle of the Saudi Arabian desert in 50-degree heat in a Bedouin tent for 2 days. But that's another story. I'd also done some work with an investment bank in Bahrain. So when I turned up at the Homeland Security at Philadelphia Airport to go into the country, I rocked up at the desk there, and of course you hand over your passport, and the security guards looked at it and he said, "Oh, interesting. USA, Saudi Arabia, USA, Bahrain." And I was thinking, hang on, he's putting 2 and 2 together and getting 5. So he said, "What's going on here?" And I said, "Just the work that I do." I said, "I've been working in the States, but I've been working in these countries as well." So then he asked me what I did, and then he said, "Do you pay your taxes for what the income you receive from working in the States?" Said yes, did all that. And then he said, "Well, based on what you do, couldn't somebody in the US do what you do so that you don't have to come and work here?" At which point I said no. And he said, "Why not?" And I said, "Because I'm unique." And I wish I hadn't said that, because I then spent another 2 hours with 2 of his colleagues in a small room being interrogated. And the only thing I didn't get to the stage of was with the rubber glove going on the hand.
I wasn't going to ask.
Yeah, no, so it didn't go that far. So I suppose the life lesson out of that is we all enjoy different humour. And sometimes you've just got to rein back your frivolity, especially with people that may not find it as funny as you. So yes, these days I'm a little bit more cautious and wary sometimes.
I don't blame you. I'm glad that story could have probably ended up very differently.
I know. It could have, and but it ends up now that if my wife and I, if we go to America on vacation, on occasions we do, she stands in a different line.
Does she? She doesn't want to be associated.
Yeah, I know.
With you.
I know. Yeah.
Well, Nick, that is just such a brilliant answer to that question.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Sadly, that brings us to the end, though. I've absolutely loved our conversation. I'm sure we could sit here for probably all night going through all of the elements and a few more of your stories. But if people want to get in touch with you, what are the best links?
LinkedIn, if you're on LinkedIn, Nick Fewings, Teamworkologist. And then I think if you Nick at engagementworks.com, but it's engagementworks doesn't have an E at the beginning of it, because when I registered the company, there was another company that had that, so I thought, okay, let's just drop the E off it and start it with the letter N, which is obviously my initial letter as well for Nick. So Nick at engagementworks.com.
Perfect. We'll put all of the links just in case people are struggling to find it, but we'll put all of the links in the description. Thank you so much, Nick. Absolutely brilliant.
Pleasure.
Love the book, love the practical advice, love your whole philosophy and the way it's delivered. And it's really changed my perspective on a lot of things, and definitely given me stuff that I'm going to take into my work and personal life. So thank you so much for today.
And thank you very much for the opportunity. It's been a really great evening.
Excellent.
Thoroughly enjoyed your questions.
Brilliant. Thanks again.
Pleasure.